In a military camp which is located in the Compton mountain range, reports come in that scouting operations have been obstructed due to the intensity of the rain. However, there have been reports of lights from the northeast. Without a clear sight, the soldiers assume that the lights are coming from McCarthy's men. Heading the camp is Adrian von Callista, who is the Count of Callista. After receiving this report, the Count stands up to verify the info by himself. Meanwhile, the soldiers are already complaining about the hardship they are enduring. They are doing all these in another man's land just because of the rarity of a dragon. In addition, the men are being put through this hardship because the Count needs to gain favor from the Townsend Dukes. It is also rumored that the Count is a waste, but the soldiers are relieved that he still has what it takes to lead them in battle. Unknown to them, they are wrong. The person under the battle helmet is not actually Callista himself. The person under the helmet is our MC, Hans, and he has been serving Callista since he was a kid. At first, he helped with homework, but not long after this, he was forced to learn swordplay and the like. After Adrian's father died, Hans was forced to take on management and other tasks in the county. Eventually, Hans ended up being a double for Adrian while he wasted away drinking and having fun with women. And now, he is on the battlefield instead of the real Adrian. Hans has accepted everything that comes with the job, but he never imagined that he would have to go to the battlefield. Hans and the soldiers finally reach where the scouts saw the lights. Because the visibility is poor, one of the soldiers suggests that they go back to camp. However, Hans is lost in thought about the commoner's life and if there is even an afterlife once they die. Just as they prepare to return to camp, one of the soldiers gets struck down. This is when it dawns on them that they have run into an ambush. In the commotion, Hans gets impaled by a spear from behind. He crashes to the ground as he wonders if this is the end for him. He couldn't believe that he was going to be a stand-in or body double for someone else. As he slowly loses consciousness, he wonders if there is a second life where he would be able to live as his own self, not someone else. In this thought, Hans finally closes his eyes and fades away. Suddenly, Hans opens his eyes to see one of the maids, Madeline, kneeling and crying in front of him. He wonders why the maid is there at the moment and the fact that the maid is young. Hans is shocked to hear the maid begging him and addressing him as her lord. Just then, he notices that he is holding a whip in his hand, and when he looks around, he realizes that he is in a royal and beautiful room. He stares in the mirror and sees the reflection of Count Callista in the mirror. He immediately drops the cane he is holding, and he grabs his face to see if he is seeing correctly. He rushes toward Madeline with pity in his eyes, but Madeline quickly raises her hands, expecting to be hit. Hans then pulls back, and he asks the maid what year it is. Madeline replies that they are in the year 853. This shocks Hans as he figures out something important. It turns out that he has somehow entered the body of Count Callista, his former master, and in addition to this, everything has gone back 15 years. In disbelief, Hans lies down on the bed, wondering if this is reality or not. He is in a luxurious room with so many shining things, and the body of the Count seems very soft. He is delicate since he has never done anything related to labor in the past. To get a handle on things, Hans tells Madeline to leave the room. As the girl walks away, there are clear indications of cane marks on the back of her legs. This shows that she has suffered repeated abuse at the hands of Adrian. Hans falls back on the bed and admits that Adrian is the worst and most wasteful lord in the history of lords. Adrian is known to stop his servants for petty reasons, and he even treats them like toys. After he got older, Adrian descended into a total life of wastefulness. During all those times, Hans was the one cleaning up the messes made by Adrian. Suddenly, Hans remembers something and he rushes out of the room. He opens one of the rooms in the house, but he sees something else entirely. This was supposed to be his room, but it is being used as the storage room. He can't believe his eyes, but he is very sure that he is not in the wrong room since this is where he lived for over 20 years of his life. He is wondering what is happening when he hears one of the servants call him. The servant Claude wonders what the castle lord is doing in the servants' quarters. Claude is not a stranger to Hans since he grew up with him and Madeline. They were his companions, and they are just like he remembered. Hans then turns to Claude, asking him where the servant Hans is. However, this question leaves Claude baffled, since he has never heard of anyone named Hans. Hans tried to describe who he was, but Claude had no idea what the guy was talking about. This is when the bitter realization hits Hans that his reincarnation into Adrian's body means he doesn't exist in this current world. The news soon started spreading among the servants about the irregularities in the Lord's behavior. Some have seen him wake up early in the morning, which is very unusual because he usually wakes up in the afternoon. Two of the maids are busy talking about Hans when he pops up behind them, scaring them. He apologizes for startling them and asks them to call the nanny for him. It is now a week since Hans entered Adrian's body. Hans realizes that he needs to accept that he is Adrian, and he needs to live the life too. Not long after this, the nanny comes over to attend to Hans. The nanny is worried that Hans doesn't sleep well. Hans replies that he hardly sleeps. Even when he opens his eyes, he opens them again. The woman then asks if she should prepare breakfast, but Hans says no. He tells the woman that he needs to visit his mother first. The nanny is shocked when she hears this, but she immediately agrees that Hans's suggestion is nice. Hans makes his way to his mother's chambers, and when he arrives at the door, his sister, Regina, and mother, Owen, are both shocked to see him. Regina is forced to ask the boy what he has come to do in such early hours. Owen berates her daughter for saying something like, but she is not to be blamed because Adrian has never cared about the welfare of his family. Owen quickly tells her son to enter, assuring him that she is happy to see him. Apparently, 3 years ago, after the death of the former count, Owen had been bedridden because she couldn't handle the shock. Adrian, Owen, and Regina are what is left of House Callista. Despite being in a remote location in the Rosenbaum Empire, the Callista family was well-to-do. However, the family lost all of its former glory after the death of the former count. The family became so poor that they had to lease out troops just so they could put food on their table. In the future, where Hans came from, Owen later died, and Regina was left to inherit a house sunk in debt. Hans then holds his mother's hand, assuring her that he will come visit more often. However, his mother tells him not to bother himself too much about visits because she is aware that managing the estate is stressful already. After he finally leaves Owen's chambers, Hans plans to do everything in his power to properly manage the estate. Just then, Hans is informed by the butler, Alman, that Mr. Flynn has come to see him. Hans then remembers that around this time there was a butler who served Adrian, and his name was Alman. He was a very loyal butler who protected the interests of the servants. He even used his own body to protect the servants whenever they were being hurt by Adrian. He was loyal even though Adrian didn't make life easy for him. However, it was around this time that he resigned, and a new butler, Side, was hired. Side was the worst of butlers because he was so incompetent, and he even helped destroy the family's finances. Since it is time for Alman to leave, Hans is already thinking of a way to stop this. Meanwhile, Hans sets up a meeting with Flynn. Flynn is the administrator of the Callista territory. Flynn is also a bad person who treated the servants very poorly. He beat them up like they were his own slaves. Hans wants to hear what Flynn has to say, and as expected, Flynn tells him that he has found a suitable replacement for Alman. He wants them to get rid of Alman without wasting time. Hans is shocked as he hears Flynn talk about his plan. Just like how Hans remembered it, Flynn recommends a fellow named Side. Flynn claims that Side is a competent fellow, and he is also like a brother to him. Before Flynn can say anything further, Hans tells him to stop talking. Hans holds his head in anger and frustration. He then asks Flynn to confirm if he really heard him clearly. He wants to know if Flynn really has the plans to fire Alman. When Flynn realizes that Hans is getting all confused about things, he blames himself for the mix-up. He then reaches into his inner pocket and brings out something. He takes Hans's hand and places 10 gold coins in the boy's hand. Hans was left with utter shock and disgust when this happened. Flynn mentions that he doesn't want the boy to dirty his hands with what is about to happen. He already has plans to settle everything with a simple charge of embezzlement. As usual, Flynn tells Hans that he has prepared the records for him. Hans remains mute as he stares at the 10 gold coins in his palm. Usually, a poor family lives on 10 silver per month. Basically, 10 gold coins are 20 months worth of living expenses for a commoner. 1 gold equals 20 silver coins. Since Flynn is the administrator of the Callista territory, and apart from the small income he is getting, he has no other source of income. Hans easily figures out that the money given to him is stolen money from the people. Hans is utterly disappointed with the fact that Adrian had collected embezzled money as bribes. In return for this, the estate is being manipulated by others like Flynn. It finally dawns on Hans that Flynn didn't resign but was driven out. Everyone knew the man was falsely accused, but they all stayed quiet, and Hans was also too young at the time to know the truth. Hans is utterly disappointed with everything coming to light. With a low tone, Hans calls upon Oswald, the night bodyguard. In a twist of things, Hans tells Oswald to immediately arrest Flynn. Hans tells Oswald that Flynn made corrupt requests of him, and he also falsely accused his servant. Because of his offenses, Hans demands that Oswald lock Flynn in the dungeon. Oswald tends to the order without wasting time, but Flynn is left in total disbelief and his mouth is left wide open. Flynn calls on Hans to try and convince him, but he just ignores him as he is dragged away by Oswald. Hans drops the 10 gold coins on the table while wondering why he entered Adrian's body. He might not know anything, but he knows that the previous owner of the body, Adrian, has caused loads of people pain. Hans is not Adrian, and he is not ready to sit back and let history repeat itself. In the mansion's hall, Oswald is busy dragging Flynn to the dungeon. He tells Flynn to walk very well while calling him a scum. Oswald doesn't know Flynn's offense, but he doesn't care. Even Flynn is surprised by the turn of events. He cannot believe that he is being sent to the dungeon. In a crumbling house headed by a wasteful leader, Oswald is the only knight left. Flynn has always considered Adrian the biggest fool since he is easy to manipulate. Now that Flynn has been arrested, he wonders if Adrian is finally trying to show some pride, but little does he know that the person inhabiting Adrian's body is no longer the foolish Adrian. However, Flynn expects Hans to suffer because the world is not a bed of roses. Oswald drags Flynn to the dungeon and angrily throws him into the cell without regard to his former position. Even Flynn is forced to ask if Oswald is not handling him a little too roughly, but Oswald urges him to shut up until his fate is decided by the Lord. To know more about the characters, Oswald is the son of a knight who served the previous count, and when all the knights left, only he stayed because he is loyal. Inside his cell, Flynn believes that he still has what it takes to sweet-talk the Lord into doing what he wants. He plans to manipulate the Lord and get him to fire Oswald. Flynn cannot believe that a mere knight like Oswald is acting almighty and great around him. With what he knows, Flynn says Adrian is nothing but a 15-year-old boy who is lazy and also has poor judgment. He has always manipulated him into raising taxes, and Adrian has always followed his suggestions. Flynn believes that Adrian is just in a bad mood for the day and just a bit of flattery will get him back in his pocket in no time. Flynn starts practicing how he is going to talk to the Lord when he comes to see him. He plans to laugh with him and even kneel down to him if that is what it takes. He is in the middle of his dumb practice section when Hans arrives. Judging from how Hans is standing, Flynn is left wondering if this is the same boy he used to manipulate. Flynn quickly goes down on his knees, asking Hans for mercy. In a cold manner, Hans tells Flynn that there is no need for him to beg for mercy because from that moment forward, all crimes in the territory will be judged through trials. Upon hearing the word trial, Flynn loses himself in fear. Hans turns around to leave, and Flynn starts begging. He tries manipulating Hans as he usually does. He reminds the boy that he has been loyal to him, but Hans ignores all of his pleas and walks away like he can't hear. Flynn was originally a commoner but managed to climb the ranks and finally became an administrator in the Callista territory. He was regarded as very important, but now the same Flynn has found himself in a courtroom in front of a judge. Flynn is charged with bribery, embezzlement, and breach of trust. Because of these offenses, Flynn faces asset confiscation and possible imprisonment. Flynn's trial is a significant shock to the residents of the territory, and it also serves as a warning to the negligent administrators within the territory. The servants in the house are even shocked about the trial, since it's been a long time since they had a trial in the land. Hans calls his servants together, and some of them are already scared that they are about to be punished. Alman tells Hans that all of the servants are gathered, and with pity in his voice, Hans asks the servants how he has performed so far as a lord. Since the servants are the closest to him, he believes that they should know better. This question shocks the servants as they do not understand what the Lord is trying to do. The only thing they can hope for is that they don't get hit or beaten up. After waiting but with no reply, Hans then opens his mouth to talk. What comes next shocks his servants and everyone in the room. Hans bows his head and he begs the servants for forgiveness. Hans admits that he has lashed out and caused them pain for stupid reasons. The servants start to whisper amongst themselves as they try to figure out what is happening. Hans continues by saying one apology doesn't erase all of his past wrongs, but he just wants to make amends with the servants. He adds that he has shown unreliable behavior while leading the house. However, he assures them that from that moment forward, he is going to make Callista a better place for them to live. And to start doing this, Hans says he needs to start taking care of the people in his castle. Hans lets them know that he plans to fix everything that is wrong, but admits that it might be chaotic at first. But he urges the servants to trust and follow him. After saying all of these, the servants are left in shock and total disbelief. After the meeting, Claude and Madeline talk about the sudden change. Madeline says the Lord still beat her some days ago, but now he is acting totally different. She wonders if someone can truly change in such a short space of time. Inside Hans' chambers, he thanks Alman for his good work and tells him that he is free to leave. However, Alman stays back and he bows his head to Hans to thank him. Hans is shocked by what Alman is doing, and Alman reveals that he is aware that the Lord supported him when Flynn was trying to falsely accuse him. Hans then urges Alman to raise his head, reminding him that they have been together for so long and he only did what was right. Hans then holds Alman's hand, telling him to report to him if anyone ever tries to wrongfully accuse him next time. Hearing this from Hans, Alman is forced to admit that the Lord has truly changed. Alman has been serving the Lord for over 10 years, and even though the Lord's appearance remains unchanged, Alman believes that he seems like a totally different person. Because of his new resolve, Alman pledges his allegiance to Hans, assuring him that he is going to follow him. Later that day, Hans stands by the window in his room. He thinks about everything so far. He realizes that he was not just given a second chance, but he was also gifted with the noble title of Count Callista. Hans basically controls the entire Callista territory. To add to this, Hans has the knowledge of 15 years into the future. Thankfully, he has knowledge about how to run things, since he was basically doing that in his past life. Since he has this knowledge, he plans to use it to his advantage. In the first step of doing what is right, Hans plans to protect those who are dear to him. These include his remaining family members and the servants. He also wishes that everyone in the land could live the life they want without getting bound by the restrictions of a status. However, Hans is aware that he can't do all of these without making the territory better. Hans starts to think deeply if there is anything that he knows from the future that can help him with this endeavor. Just then, he remembers the rumors about the dragon lair. Hans's face lights up in excitement when he realizes that he has hit the jackpot, which is the dragon lair that he needs to find. After the revelation of the dragon lair, Hans swoops into action. He organizes his servants in search of the dragon's lair. After searching for days without any result, Oswald urges Hans to take a rest since he looks exhausted. However, Hans is not ready to take a break. He only collects a pouch of water from Oswald and gulps it down. He apologizes for making everyone work so hard. It's been days since Hans joined his servants to inspect the territory, and he has no plan of stopping anytime soon. To his servants, he is inspecting the territory, but unknown to them, he is actually searching for the dragon's lair. Dragons are considered to be the mightiest of creatures, and also the most intelligent divine beings. Each dragon is considered to be almost godlike. However, they went extinct long ago. But whenever their hideouts are found or discovered, it catches the attention of everyone. This is because a large amount of treasures are usually found in the dragon lairs. And to Hans's knowledge, he knows a dragon lair will be found in the mountain range. It turns out that the current emperor of the Rosenbaum Empire is just a young puppet. The two families upholding the empire are the Townsend family and the McCarthy family. These two families uphold the delicate balance in the empire. The Compton Mountain is located between the borders of the two great houses, and this was where the dragon lair was found. A conflict broke out between the two families due to the ownership of the lair. The Callista land happens to be on the border, and the Callista family ends up sending troops to align with the Townsend house. Now that Hans has found himself in the past, he has 15 years ahead to discover the lair. Hans leaves his servants and runs deeper into the woods in search of the lair. It is said that dragons hoard mountains of gold and jewels, and these jewels are enough to buy a small kingdom, according to rumors. With this in mind, Hans knows that finding the lair will provide balance to the territory. However, the exact location of the lair is unknown, but its discovery spread far and wide. It was said to have been discovered by an herbalist who was lost in an oak forest. The herbalist only ran into the lair by sheer luck. Since it is easy to recognize, Hans knows that he will recognize the lair once he sees it. Hans continues searching, but after a few hours he is already tired. He fails to find the lair, and not even anything that leads to it. He starts to wonder if the rumor about the herbalist is true or false. Since the sun is already setting, he plans to return. He feels very tired, which indicates that Andrian's body is weak. Hans plans to exercise and work on his body once he returns home. Meanwhile, the servants are already calling out to him. Hans is not happy with the fact that he is stressing out the servants. Hans starts thinking of asking for help so he can find the lair, but he doesn't want to do this since he aims to keep the lair a secret. He knows fully well that the existence of the dragon's lair can as well spark a civil war, which is why he needs to be careful. Just then, Hans loses himself in thought and he slips down a cliff. He lands hard on the ground, sustaining injuries, but he manages to survive. Hans is stuck halfway between the cliff and his eyes just flashed before his eyes. Hans's ribs are broken, but he is worried about how he can get back to the top of the mountain. He manages to get back up, and this is when he notices an opening in the mountain. With the formation he is looking at, Hans easily figures out that he has stumbled upon the dragon's lair. The lair is located in the middle of a cliff, which is such an absurd location. Hans assumes that the entrance was used by a guardian, and talking of guardians, they are creatures that protect a dragon. The rugged terrain of the mountain range was what kept the lair well hidden. Even though he found the supposed lair, Hans is worried about how he is going to return to the mountaintop. He knows there is no way in hell that Oswald will be able to find him where he is. Hans is already thinking about how he is going to die when he enters the lair's majestic hall. In the middle of the hall is a golden magic circle. Hans steps into the magic circle, and suddenly he is healed of all his injuries. Hans is completely blown away by this discovery, as the lair was supposed to be empty. He wonders if the space itself is enchanted with healing magic. Hans is impressed by this because he knows that just with the discovery of the healing magic, the lair is already worth a lot. Hans almost loses himself in the thoughts of what can be, but he slaps himself back to reality. Hans plans to thoroughly explore the lair and know what it entails. With the discovery of the lair, Hans figures that it would be the greatest asset for him, a person who returned to the past in someone else's body. Hans soon finds 4 doors that are supposedly connected to the center. Hans is impressed with the spaces in the lair, as it is built like an ant colony. Hans continues to explore, and he soon finds what seems to be a library. Since dragons are known to take human form sometimes, Hans assumes that the dragon was reading so it could enjoy human pleasures. With what he has seen so far, Hans figures that the lair is built like where humans live since it contains a bedroom, a study, and a dressing room. Everything so far doesn't contain great treasures like rumored, but Hans believes that the lair will soon hold great value. The most useful part that he has come across so far is the central area with healing magic. Hans decides that he is going to call the central area the Healing Hall. Hans is even more impressed by this discovery because healing magic is almost a thing of the past. Hans then proceeds into the last room that he hasn't checked. Hans enters the room and freezes in fear and shock when he sees a golden dragon lying down in front of him. Hans doesn't want to believe that what he is staring at is real. With what he knows, Dragons are said to have gone extinct at least 100 years ago. With this, Hans believes that the dragon he is looking at is nothing but a corpse. But at the same time, he wonders if a corpse will still be shining and clean. Just then, Hans touches the dragon, and suddenly, the room is filled with a bright light emanating from the dragon. The light is so bright that Hans is forced to back away from the dragon. The light then starts to enter his body, and at the same time, he hears a voice in his head. Still trying to figure out what is happening, Hans finds himself in the presence of a man in a royal robe. With fear in his body, Hans asks the weird man who he is. Hans can clearly feel the strange aura from the man, and with this, he knows that the person standing in front of him is not human. The man finally voices out and reveals that his name is Seyfried. He continues by saying he is the last head of the Gold Clan, and in addition to this, he is the final dragon of the continent. Hans is shocked when he realizes that he is standing in the presence of a dragon. Hans then asks the dragon if he is the master of the lyre, but he decides to explain things to Hans. He tells Hans that the dragon he saw earlier is nothing more than a lifeless shell. The voice Hans is now hearing in his head is the final magic that he left behind. Hans still doesn't understand this, and Seyfried continues further. He explains that dragons are superior beings on the land, but over the ages, they were consumed and conflicted by rivalry. In the end of it all, Seyfried becomes the last dragon of the continent. Dragons are usually solitary by nature, which is why being alone means nothing to Seyfried, but he can't bear the faintest idea that the dragon's magic will disappear forever after he is gone. This is why he made a crucial decision to pass down his knowledge and legacy to the intelligent being who would find his lair by fate and preserve the magic of dragons. Seyfried reveals that he died in the year 354, and the spell he designed was to last for 500 years after his death. If no one had found him in the space of those 500 years, his corpse would have crumbled, and dragon magic would have been lost to history. Seyfried doesn't want this, but he would have accepted it as fate too. However, he is thankful that Hans, who is now his successor, has found him. Seyfried then wishes that magic continues to exist in the world even for future generations. Hans then protests that he has no knowledge of magic. He adds that there are few mages left in the world, which means it would be hard for him to learn magic. Seyfried laughs when Hans says this, leaving Hans to wonder what is so amusing to the dragon. The dragon reminds Hans that he has been chosen as his successor, and he points to Hans's right chest. Just as he touches Hans, he finds himself back in the lair. Hans is left wondering if what he just witnessed is an illusion or a dream. He looks around the room to see that the dragon's body has totally perished. This is when it dawns on Hans that he has been left a dragon heart, and this is located on the right side of his chest. Aside from the human heart in his body, Hans can feel another presence like a blurry smoke but yet a powerful source of magic. With this, Seyfried's knowledge starts to pour into Hans via the new heart. Hans is blessed with so much information all at once, and he still doesn't understand most of it. However, Hans is certain about something, and this is the fact that he can now use dragon tongue magic. Unlike humans who must craft a spell with long incantations before using an activation word, the dragon tongue magic activates with just a single trigger word. Since the dragon tongue magic requires the power generated from a dragon heart, Hans is confident that the dragon heart left behind for him by Seyfried will do the job. With the help of the dragon tongue magic, Hans is able to get to the mountaintop using the magic activation word known as fly. However, Hans used up all his mana just to get to the top of the mountain. The dragon heart isn't stable yet, which is why his mana is still limited. But Hans isn't worried about this because he knows the heart will grow to match his body. And eventually, Hans will have what it takes to use magic, which is close to divine power. Hans finally reunites with his servants, who have been worried since he disappeared. They all rush toward him to check if he is fine. Not long after this, Hans and the group prepare to return to the estate. Hans is glad that he gained more than what he actually went for. He only went in search of a dragon's lair, but he came back as the successor of a dragon. Hans then remembers what the dragon said about the spell he used, which is supposed to last 500 years. Subtracting the year the dragon died from the present year, Hans realizes that the dragon's legacy would have been lost forever if he had been 1 year late. Hans remembers that in his previous life, the dragon wasn't discovered until 15 years from now, which means magic was not what it was. It is known that most mages can't even break past the first or second circle in their lifetimes, and those who manage to reach the fifth circle are considered to be archmages. However, dragons are born at the highest height of intellect, which is the ninth circle. The ninth circle is considered to be a level far beyond human reach. Hans knows that the ninth level might no longer be a dream to him again, since he has obtained the power of a dragon. When he finally returns to the estate, he is welcomed by his sister, who is already worried about him. His sister scolds him for disappearing and leaving everyone to worry. His sister also notices that his clothes are torn, and this forces the girl to ask if he ran into bandits. However, Hans assures his sister that he is fine since he is not hurt. He confesses that he was hurt before, but now he is fine. Oswald then goes down on his knees, begging for forgiveness because he blames himself for not looking after the Lord. Even Hans's sister blames the old man, but Hans manages to defuse the entire situation by assuring everyone that he is fine. Hans manages to return to his room and he heaves a sigh of relief. He knows that Oswald stayed behind because of loyalty, and the same thing can be said for the butler Alman. Hans is glad to have someone like Alman and Oswald by his side, because he knows that these are people who will always be by his side to help him. Hans then summons Alman to his chambers, and in no time, Alman shows up. Hans apologizes for calling on the man very late at night. He asks Alman about the servant list and salary ledger he told him to prepare before he went on the tour. Alman assures Hans that everything is ready, but he wonders if the Lord has plans to review them at that moment. He reminds Hans that it is already late, and coupled with that, Alman was told about Hans's accident while on tour. However, Hans assures the guy that he is pretty fine. He tells Alman to bring the documents to him, and even when Alman still tries to convince him, Hans remains adamant. He considers the well-being of his servants a priority, which is why he needs to handle everything with a matter of urgency. Knowing that there is no way to convince Hans, Alman agrees to bring the documents to him. Moments later, Hans dips his hand into his pocket and brings out some gold coins. He then asks Alman if he knows about Grace. Claude visits one of the market women named Lowen to place orders from her. Claude hands her the list of what he wants, leaving the woman baffled. Claude asks her if it would be difficult for her to supply the order, but Lowen replies that she has no problem coming through. She was just happy, which is why she was baffled. Hans's policy has completely changed everything in the territory. Taxes have been slashed and orders from the estate have also increased. Everyone in the area now believes that life is worth living, and this is something none of them ever thought they could say before. Lowen gives Claude the receipt for the order and assures him that she will deliver the goods by evening. Surprisingly, the woman gives Claude 2 apples before he leaves. Lowen claims that the apples are her own way of appreciating Claude for how well he is serving the Lord. She is convinced that the servant's actions are part of what turned the Lord into such a loving person. Claude then rushes back to the estate. He finds Madeline, who was out gathering herbs. Claude wears a big smile on his face while hugging the 2 apples that Lowen gave him. He gives Madeline one of the apples, and she asks him where he got it. He replies that Lowen gave it to him, leaving Madeline totally shocked. Lowen has always been known as a stingy old lady, but to everyone's surprise, she has changed. Claude then adds that a lot has also changed. It was shocking that Flynn was punished, but in addition to this, all the other corrupt officials were also punished. Hans had to go through the estate ledgers all by himself so he could pick out the bad eggs. Even the illegally collected taxes were all returned to the citizens, and this includes those of the servants. The servants have gotten a better life with improved pay, break times, and new outfits. The castle is also easily accessible to those on the outside now. Because of these changes, the servants now have time to chill outside the castle just like Madeline and Claude are doing. Claude notices that Madeline is already talking nicely about the Lord. He reminds her that the Lord was the one who treated them badly in the first place. Claude doesn't want to believe that people change so easily. Madeline agrees to this, but she reveals that anytime she sees Hans these days, something just tells her that she made hasty decisions. Now, with everything that is going on, Madeline feels like giving the Lord another chance. Claude then asks Madeline if she is forgiving Hans because he is handsome, and she says no. Moments later, the two start returning to the castle. They talk about how Hans has not been staying around so well. It is now hard for any of them to even see Hans. Apparently, Hans lies to them that he has been going on inspections, but unknown to them, he was visiting the dragon's lair. Inside the lair, Hans has been practicing his magic. He is now able to use spells like fireballs, and in addition to this, the shield spell is also available to him. It is now almost a month since he inherited the dragon's power, and Hans has been consistent with training since then. He can clearly see that his magic has improved, and with time, he knows that he will become better. However, he is not comfortable with the fact that he has to travel by horse down to the lair anytime he wants to practice magic. Since the lair is reinforced with magic, no matter how hard he trains, the lair cannot be destroyed. Hans considers the lair the perfect training grounds for him. However, it would have been better if he could come and go more easily. Hans knows there is a way he can achieve this, and this is by teleportation magic, which is called the Warp Gate. This allows him to teleport to a designated coordinate within a safe zone. However, the Warp Gate is a pretty high spell, which is why it is ranked among the 7th circle. At the moment, Hans cannot perform this spell since he is not higher than level 2 or 3. Nonetheless, Hans's current level is still impressive since the Empire's Grand Mage hasn't made it past level 5. To master better teleportation spells, Hans knows he needs to master the 3-circle short-range teleportation spell, which is known as Blink. He has been trying this for days, but he keeps falling. Hans then decides to try it again, and to his surprise, the spell works for the first time. Hans is able to move a bit forward from where he was standing. Hans is still in the middle of celebrating his small wins when everywhere suddenly turns white. He feels some sort of discomfort coming from the dragon's heart, and when he looks up, he sees Seyfried staring at him. The dragon commends Hans' work rate so far. Seyfried tells Hans that he has now managed to get past the beginner level, and as his reward, Seyfried unlocks a new area of the lyre to help Hans continue to advance. He adds that the more Hans goes, the more useful things he gets. Hans then asks Seyfried why he kept the treasures hidden. The dragon reveals that it was his way of making sure that a greedy person does not have access to the laire's treasures. Seyfried then urges Hans to continue growing so that his magic can continue to live. After his discussion with Seyfried, Hans realizes that the dragon wasn't lying. Hans stumbles upon a room that was hidden with magic, and inside the room are treasures. This also confirms the rumor that a dragon's lair is filled with treasures. In addition to the treasures he has found, Hans remembers Seyfried telling him that he will unlock more treasures as he progresses. Hans finds a book in the room that is all about artifacts. Artifacts are objects that have been infused with magic, and the magic remains in them permanently. Artifacts are now rare to come by since magic is almost extinct, and with Hans's present level, he doesn't even have what it takes to make artifacts. After realizing that the books on the shelf are talking about artifacts, he looks around to finally figure out that all the objects in the room are nothing but artifacts. There are a total of 10 artifacts that are on display in the room, and each of them comes with a book that explains them in detail. Thanks to these books, Hans is able to choose the artifacts that are most useful to him at that moment. The first artifact he chose is the Spring Afternoon. The artifact is said to have been made by a 7th Circle Archmage for his sick wife. The artifact contains healing magic. Though healing magic is not that efficient, the effect of the artifact boosts vitality, and Hans knows that it would be great for his sick mother. The second artifact he chose is the Dance of Shadows. This artifact was created by the Red Dragon, Berestein. Even though the artifact looks simple when looking at it, it is very effective. Hans puts it on, generating a red aura around him. The artifact is filled with a highly advanced concealment spell, which makes the wearer basically invincible. Hans stands in front of a mirror, but nothing shows, and even his footsteps are completely silent. Hans feels like his body has no weight whatsoever with the use of the artifact. Hans is very excited about the discovery of the artifacts, as they prove to be really useful. And the third artifact that Hans picks is called the Breath of Earth. This artifact is built in the form of a snake, and it is the only thing created by Seyfried himself. The artifact provides the one thing Hans has been lacking, which is the ability to teleport. With the artifact, Hans can use the warp ability. The warp effect has its coordinates set to the lair. With this, Hans knows he can leave the castle pretty easily without facing scrutiny from his sister and Alman. With the distance issue out of the window, Hans is confident that training will be much easier than before. Hans admits that he is enjoying every bit of training so far. After the day's training, Hans gets on his horse and starts riding back to the castle. He fully knows that this will be his last journey to Mountain Compton, since he now has the artifact to easily teleport him. Hans is relieved that the mountain is deserted, and he hasn't finished this thought when he runs into troops. Hans is shocked to see soldiers on the mountain. Hans then introduces himself as the Lord of the Territory, and he asks the troop leader why he has led soldiers into another person's territory without notification. The knight leading the soldiers comes off very rude when he addresses Hans as a child. He claims that the reports he has heard of Callista's leader being a child are nothing but the truth. He then introduces himself as Count Pete Ross, the commander of the 1st Imperial Knights. Hans is not delighted with Pete's words about him being a child. Hans reminds Pete that he might be from the capital, but since they are both counts, they have the same authority and status. It is customary that they address each other formally, no matter the age gap. Pete is shocked to see that Hans has no issue challenging him. Hans then proceeded to ask Pete what he had come to do in Callista. Pete claims that time is not on his side, so he decides to go straight to the point. Pete reveals that the Count of Rodriguez has started a rebellion. He and the soldiers are currently in pursuit of the Count, so he can be executed. Pete then brings out a stamped letter from the Emperor to show that he is telling the truth. By royal decree, Hans is also expected to cooperate with them, using Callista's resources to find the man. The moment Hans heard the name, it struck him that he actually remembers who Laquia de Rodriguez is. Laquia was a young man who, at the age of 16, became the greatest sword prodigy and quickly reached the rank of a swordmaster. However, he was caught up in his family's treason, and he ended up meeting a tragic end. It was said that Laquia and the Emperor were close friends from childhood. Everything changed when the young prince became emperor. The two great families, McCarthy and Townsend, started playing the young and naive emperor. They were able to get rid of those who would support and help the emperor. That was around the same time when Rodriguez was falsely accused. He died in the process, but 5 years later, it was revealed that he was actually innocent. His name was cleared of all charges, but the damage has been done because his family is already wiped out. The only thing left then was the Empire mourning such an innocent soul and a young genius who died as a victim of the power struggle. Having this knowledge with him, Hans knows he has to save Laquia this time. Pete notices that Hans is lost in thought, and he calls his attention. He informs Hans that Laquia is injured and he ran into the mountains the last time they saw him. Hans then replies that he is going to cooperate, but he urges them to end the search for the day since it is getting late already. He promises that they will begin the search again the following day. Pete arrogantly tells Hans that his men are more than enough to find the wounded man. However, Hans opens his eyes to the fact that the Compton Mountains are not what he and his men are used to. They can't conduct a search while riding a horse, and in addition to this, Pete and his men are all wearing heavy armor. He then calls Pete's attention to the fact that his men are already tired. Hans assures Pete that the only way out is to begin the search first thing very early the next day. Hans knows that something similar to this happened during his previous life when House Callista sent troops to help the Townsend family. The Compton Mountains have one of the roughest terrains in the kingdom, and Hans admits that he was only able to find the lair using his past knowledge and the right amount of sheer luck. He knows that to find a wounded man in under a day will be very difficult, especially in the mountains. After he has successfully convinced Pete to postpone the search, Hans goes in search of Lakia. He uses his magic to conduct a wide scan of the area. After a really good effort, he is able to locate Lakia. He rides to where Lakia is to find him wounded and unconscious. His wounds are very severe, and since Hans has no healing abilities yet, the only thing he can do to help is use the Spring Afternoon artifact. Even if the ring's effect is weak, Hans knows that it is better than doing nothing. He places the ring on Lakia's finger, and it immediately gets to work. Hans then uses the feathering spell on Lakia to make him lighter so he can carry him to the horse. Hans had already made up his mind that he would be the one to save Lakia from impending doom. Hans gets Lakia on horseback and starts riding at full speed to the castle. Just as he gets close to the castle, he realizes that Pete and his men have already gotten there. There is an imperial flag hanging down in front of the castle. Hans manages to stay calm and get ahead of the situation. He uses the invisibility artifact to make himself and Lakia vanish from the naked eye. The entire town is already filled with Lakia's wanted posters. Even the townspeople are shocked at this new development. The wanted poster has everything that they need to recognize Lakia. It features his navy blue eyes and his gray hair. Inside the castle, Pete continues with his rude behavior. He is not impressed by the way the castle looks, and because of this, he trashes the land. He further adds that the castle would have been better if it had been used as an inn. He and his knights laugh at these ridiculous jokes, while Claude and the other servants serve them drinks. Pete even extends his rude nature to the servants. He calls Claude a rude servant, claiming that the water he gave him is bad. Claude has no choice but to bow his head and ask for forgiveness from the arrogant knight. Regina enters the hall, urging Pete to refrain from violence. Regina reminds him that the castle is accommodating him and a large number of guests that they didn't prepare for. Because of this, she urges him to excuse whatever shortcomings he is facing. As expected, Pete turns around to look at Regina like trash before asking her who she is. Regina then introduces herself, but this disappoints Pete. He is not impressed that the house is being run by kids. He says the kids are supposed to be sleeping while adults handle the real thing. Pete continues by calling Regina a disgrace to the throne, but this gets her mad. Regina reminds Pete that she is standing as the representative of the land, and by this, she should be respected. Pete didn't expect to be challenged by Regina just like Hans did. He turns back while concluding that arrogance runs in the Callista family. At this point, Regina is already frustrated and a part of her wishes that her brother would show up. Meanwhile, Hans has been able to reach his room without anyone noticing, all thanks to the power of the artifact. He had actually walked past Regina when she was in a heated moment with Pete. Hans promises to handle things once he finds a way to handle Lakia. With the way things are going, Hans knows that the situation has gotten difficult. Lakia's wanted posters are all over the place, and there is nowhere for him to go. Hans also didn't take into consideration that the castle would be filled with knights. Due to Lakia's severe wounds, he is in dire need of medical attention. Hans is already scared that Lakia might die with the way things are going. Just then, Madeline enters the room with the aim of doing the cleaning. She didn't think anyone was in the room, so she didn't bother to knock, but she was shocked when she found Hans inside. She quickly apologizes to the Lord, explaining that she had no idea he was inside. Hans doesn't take offense at this, but gently tells her to keep quiet. Since Madeline has entered the room at the right time, Hans plans to use it to his advantage. He tells Madeline to quietly bring Alman to the room without anyone else noticing. In no time, Alman arrives in the room. Alman is also surprised to find Hans at the castle, since they all assumed he was away on tour. Alman urges Hans to head to the lobby since his attention is needed. Hans postpones this and tells the two that he has something he needs to show them. He takes them to his bed, where the wounded Lakia is lying. The two servants are shocked to see the wanted man in Hans's bedroom. Alman asks Hans if he captured the traitor all by himself, but Hans replies that the guy is not a traitor. Hans tells the two that Lakia was falsely accused, but he can't explain all the details yet. However, Hans reveals his decision to protect the guy. Hans asks for their help in protecting Lakia since he can't do it all by himself. The two are stunned to speak after Hans made this request of them. Hans knows that the two are probably wondering why Callista, a rural lord with no ties to the imperial house, is involving himself with a powerful family like the Rodriguezes. In addition to this, Alman and Madeline are servants. They are people who are designed to obey commands from nobles. To put it into context, they are also in a position to report the situation to Pete, who is another noble. Even with all of these risks attached, Hans tells Madeline that he would assign her to his room so he can take care of Lakia. Madeline then reminds Hans that she has no knowledge about the treatment of wounds. Hans is aware of this, and he lets Madeline know that all she needs to do is clean Lakia's wounds and give him meals. He promises to reward Madeline very generously if she does this. Hans then turns to Alman, and he asks him for a very big favor. He tells Alman that he wants him to find a corpse that looks like Lakia. He wants a young man with a similar build and gray hair. The eye color will be a nice addition, but it's not mandatory if he can't find it. Even Alman is stunned by this request, and Hans understands his situation. He knows that he is asking for something very difficult, but he lets the two know that he has to save Lakia. Hans is aware that the servants would still have doubts about him because no one believes he can change so suddenly. To the servants, he is nothing but a spoiled brat who scares his servants. He is worried that what he just asked them to do might even spark a betrayal from them. However, Hans has no choice but to hope that the two believe that he is truly a changed man. Hans tells Alman that they only need to trust him at the moment. Alman then finally breaks the silence. He acknowledges the fact that there are ranks among nobility. The imperial decree is far superior to others, but even with this, Alman admits that he is serving one person only, and that is Count Callista. Hans is totally blown away when he realizes the level of commitment that Alman has toward his family. Alman then asks Hans if there is any external pressure or coercion. He wants to know if Hans made the decision to protect Lakia himself. Hans understands where Alman is coming from, because Flynn already said that a boy of his age could easily be shaken by others. Alman proceeds further that he would need to confirm if there is no external interference before he agrees to what Hans is asking him. Looking at how loyal Alman is, Hans starts to hate the fact that Adrian once pushed away such a great person. Hans then finally answers Alman's question, assuring him that the decision came from him. He adds that the decision will benefit the land and also the subjects living in it. Once Alman has gotten his confirmation, he bows his head to the Count, letting him know that he will secure the corpse as requested. Following Alman's footsteps, Madeline also pledges to do her best. Hans is glad that he is able to convince the two to help him. Not long after this, the knights try to search Owen's room, but Regina stands at the door to prevent them. She tells them that the room belongs to her mother and she urges them to leave. Thankfully, Hans shows up just in time to intervene too. He demands to know why the soldiers are carrying a sword into the Countess's bedroom, especially when she is ill. The soldier says he heard that the Callista family is willing to cooperate. Hans admits this, but reminds the soldier that they never agreed to a search. Providing lodgings and men to find the traitor is considered cooperation for Hans. He asks the soldier if there is any place in the decree that indicates that they need to search the castle. Realizing that he has lost the battle, the soldier has no choice but to back off. Regina is glad to see her brother, and she asks him if he is fine because of the traitor running around. Hans assures Regina that he is fine while apologizing for coming late. He also commends her for handling Pete's situation very well. Regina is shocked to hear this because Hans was supposedly away when she spoke to Pete. Hans realizes that he has slipped up, but he manages to change the conversation before Regina digs deeper. He tells his sister that they should enter the room and check on their mother. Inside their mother's room, the woman urges the kids to be careful because of the traitor wandering their territory. She also adds that the kids cooperate with the Imperial Knights so they don't get into any trouble. Unknown to her, Hans has already crossed that line. Hans then assures his mother that he has provided troops to help on the search, and since the traitor is wounded, it won't take long before he is discovered. Hans then lies to his mother that he met an elderly foreign woman when he was out on tour. He claims to have helped the old lady, and in return, she gave him a ring imbued with special energy. Hans assures her mother that wearing the ring would gradually restore her health. Owen is surprised to hear this because she never took her son as the type who believes in myths. Hans tells her mother that he might not believe, but he still wants to give his mother the beautiful ring. He wears the ring on his mother's finger, and the artifact immediately gets to work. Owen immediately wears a bright smile while admitting that she feels much better. Even Regina is shocked to hear this. Owen looks closely at the gem on the ring and figures out that it is a yellow sapphire. With how the ring looks, even Owen can easily deduce that the artifact must be worth a lot. Hans is the only one who knows the true worth of the ring, and he knows that chaos would ensue if people ever find out that the ring alone is worth more than a castle. A day later, Lakia is still recovering. Hans and Madeline have been taking shifts to guard the room. Madeline watches over Lakia during the day while Hans takes over at night. Hans served as a servant in his past life, so staying up at night is nothing new to him. However, he feels less fatigued, which is all thanks to the dragon heart inside of him. Nonetheless, Hans isn't concerned about himself, but about Lakia. Hans doesn't know if Lakia's wound will be fine if he just leaves it alone. He has wiped the blood and pus, but the wound remains too deep. Just then, he hears someone knocking on the door 5 times. Hans reveals that he and Madeline came up with a trick. Either of them will knock on the door 5 times to confirm that it is them, since they can't risk other servants finding out about what they are hiding. Madeline enters the room carrying herbs with her. Hans is shocked to see this, and Madeline explains that since Lakia's external wound is severe, she brought medicinal herbs which are good for disinfection and recovery. Hans is further surprised by this, and he asks Madeline how she knows about herbs. Madeline reveals that her father was an herbalist, and while her father was working, she usually watched. Hans then remembers that Madeline had once told him and the other servants that she had learned how to make herbal teas. Hans assumed that Madeline could only make tea, but didn't know that she could handle herbs too. Madeline grinds the herbs, applies them to Lakia's wounds, and then dresses them up. Hans is glad that he has Madeline, who is basically a healer. With everything that Madeline is doing, Hans hopes that Lakia recovers. This continued for days, but Lakia doesn't show any sign of waking up. It has now been 5 days since they have been trying their best, but Lakia remains unconscious. Later that day, Madeline makes her way to the room, and she is shocked when she enters the room and there is no sign of Lakia anywhere. She immediately runs over to find Hans, and unknown to her, Lakia has regained consciousness and he is hiding behind a chair. While hiding behind cover, Lakia hears the troops outside announcing something quite important. Apparently, they have found Lakia's body in the mountain range. Lakia is shocked to hear this, but unknown to him, Hans is already in the room with him. He is able to get close to Lakia without him knowing, thanks to his invincibility artifact. Hans announces his presence by calling Lakia's name and expressing his surprise that he is already awake. In truth, Hans was already aware that Lakia was awake. Thanks to his dragon heart, Hans now has heightened senses, and he could tell that Lakia's breathing had changed. The only reason he kept pretending to still be asleep was that he was suspicious of the situation. Hans is not surprised that Lakia did this because it is the logical thing to do since he is a man on the run. Lakia must have been startled when he woke up in a stranger's room to see that he was being cared for by a boy and a girl he clearly didn't know. Knowing all of these, Hans is aware that Lakia is obviously wary of his presence. Lakia shows this by aiming a charcoal picker at Hans. Lakia demands to know Hans's name and if he is part of the troops that are outside. Hans tries the friendly approach, but Lakia suggests that he doesn't come any closer. Hans tells the man to calm down because he is still injured. He suggests that they sit down to talk so he can explain things to him. Lakia finally agrees to sit down, but he still makes sure to keep the weapon beside him just in case Hans does anything funny. Hans knows that his approach and the way he talks will be the only things that can convince Lakia that he is not a threat. Hans finally tenders his explanation to Lakia, and after hearing what he has to say, the first thing Lakia asks is about the corpse. He is surprised that the corpse that the soldiers found was a fake that was arranged by Hans. Hans confirms that he dressed the corpse up like Lakia. He wore Lakia's clothes on the corpse and also put Lakia's signet ring on the corpse. Hans then apologizes for using Lakia's things without asking for permission first. Lakia then reminds Hans that Pete knows his face, which means that he won't be deceived by a fake. Hans acknowledges this fact, which is why he made sure everything was perfect. Since it is August and it is raining, Hans left the body in the swamp so it would decompose naturally. The knights were already tired from searching the forest, and knowing Pete, he also wanted to wrap things up quickly. With this, Hans is able to deceive Pete and the soldiers. Hans then tells Lakia to stay in hiding for 5 years, assuring him that his name will be cleared. He suggests that Lakia stay in the territory for 5 years. Just then, Lakia gets defensive, asking Hans how he knew he was falsely accused. He suspects that Hans is involved in everything, but Hans lets the man know that he can't divulge what he knows just yet. Lakia also asks to know what will happen in 5 years, but Hans insists that he can't say anything. He only begs Lakia to trust him, but Lakia is not ready to have this. Lakia tells Hans that he appreciates his help, but lets him know that he is not ready to entrust his life to someone who would not tell what he needs to know. Hans understands where Lakia is coming from. He was betrayed by everyone and was branded a traitor. Hans knows everyone will definitely look like an enemy to Lakia, which is why he needs to handle the situation much better. Hans then uses an illusion spell to change Lakia's hair and eye color. Lakia is shocked to see this, and he considers it impossible. Hans just used an illusion spell right in front of him, and this is an advanced spell. In addition to this, Hans didn't say any chance. This is something even the Imperial Court mages cannot manage to do, and Hans just did it like it was nothing. Hans notices that Lakia is too stunned to talk, and he calls back his attention. He tells Lakia that there are a whole lot of things he can't tell him, and he also understands why Lakia needs to be careful. However, Hans assures the guy that he has no intentions of causing him or the Emperor harm. Hans begs Lakia to believe him, and after some moments of silence, Lakia finally agrees to believe Hans until he can't. Hans is glad to hear this, and the fact that Lakia's hostility toward him has reduced. What he heard about Lakia was that he is a soft person, but Hans figured that everything that has happened so far has changed the guy. Hans pictures himself in a hostile situation where a scary cat is trying to get him. Soon afterward, Pete takes the news of Lakia's death to the Emperor. He expects the Emperor to be happy, but he is completely reserved instead. Pete reminds the Emperor that Lakia planned to unalive him and his family by poisoning them. To give Pete some sort of satisfaction, the king pretends to be happy with Pete's achievement. After receiving the commendation he sought, Pete leaves. After his departure, the Emperor breaks down. He holds his head in anguish while wishing things were different. In that moment of grief, the Emperor promises to restore Lakia's honor. Back in Callista, Lakia is slowly settling into his new environment. Hans introduced him to everyone as his new guard. When Hans calls a meeting in the study, Lakia is present. Regina is also present, but Regina is wary of Lakia. She asks Alman if Lakia is normal, and Alman assures the young lady that all is perfectly well with Lakia. Alman lied that Hans found Lakia during one of his tours. Alman then asks Regina if there is something that actually bothers her. The girl replies that there is nothing but looking at how Lakia carries himself. Regina suspects that he is a noble. This is her call for concern. She doesn't know why someone who looks like a noble will end up being a guard in a remote land like Callista. The two then forget about Lakia for a second and talk about why Hans called them to the study, but neither of them knows the reason behind the meeting. On the other hand, Lakia is impressed that Hans is trying his best to make sure that his identity stays hidden. Only Hans, Madeline, and Alman know his true identity out of all the people living in the castle. Lakia is worried about everyone in the castle, but the person he is most worried about is the guy who just entered the study room, Hans. He is surprised by the way Hans is running things in the castle. Since Hans took over the reins when he was 12, he most likely did not have any experience beforehand. However, Lakia is impressed with the whole fake corpse thing. In addition to this, Hans is handling everyone pretty well. Lakia even gets the feeling that Hans is more mature than him because of the way he does his thing. Lakia also commends the management of the castle. All the servants are carrying out their duties with a smile on their faces, which is something that is not even common in the capital. Lakia fails to believe the fact that the castle is being run by a 15-year-old boy. The only question Lakia can ask is, who is this guy? 10 minutes after entering the room, Hans has already prepared something crazy on the board. Everyone in the room is shocked when Hans reveals his intentions to open a bank. Lakia screams at the guy, telling him that it takes a hole to open a bank. He also warns that a lot of people have gone bankrupt while attempting the risky business of opening a bank. However, Hans calmly replies that he knows why most of them failed. Hans starts by explaining that a bank isn't just about acquiring land or capital. Hans identifies that the real challenge is assembling a competent team. Hans adds that to build a bank, they need people who can manage assets and evaluate investments. They also need accountants and people who can guard valuables. Hans admits that Callista has no way of recruiting such valuable people without connections. Because of this, Hans reveals his plan to start an academy where they can train their own people in the territory. Hans plans to split everything into an accounting track and a security track. While explaining all of these, Lakia realizes that Hans has thought about every possible outcome through and through. However, Lakia is still not impressed as he believes that Hans's plan is still far from being a realistic plan. Regina then raises a viable and important question. She reminds her brother that the commoners will not be able to afford tuition for the academy since nobles are generally the only ones who go to school. Hans acknowledges Regina's concern, but he already has a solution for this too. He reveals that he has no intentions of charging those who plan to attend the academy. Even Alman is shocked to hear that Hans plans to teach the commoners for free. However, Hans tells Alman that he is wrong. Hans will not treat those who are at the academy as students. He sees them as workers in training, and because of this, he also plans to pay them. Hans says it with a smile on his face that they are going to be paying the commoners while they study. This revelation leaves Alman, Regina, and Lakia absolutely shocked. Lakia realizes that Hans is not joking, because he is saying this with a straight face. Not long after this, Alman calls the servants together. He explains the new plan to them. He lets them know about the operational plan for the academy to support the founding of the Callista Bank. Per Hans's instructions, the first set of students is to be drafted from among the staff. Alman tells the staff to indicate if they are interested in joining. Claude is the first to raise his hand and ask questions. He wants to know if they will actually be getting paid while learning, and Alman assures him that this is the case. However, their daily wages as staff members will be reduced during their learning term. Alman assures them that the reduction will not affect their cost of living. After hearing this, the servants start whispering among themselves. Most of them are already excited to join, and even those who are not smart when it comes to books are planning to join the security division. Claude is surprised by everything Hans has done so far. He knows academies are for nobles, and this makes him wonder how commoners like himself and others are supposed to learn accounting or security. Madeline then reminds Claude that he is good at math. In addition to this, Claude handles errands pretty well. Madeline suggests that Claude give it a shot since he is capable. However, Claude is doubtful of his skills. Claude doesn't think the servants' learning in the academy will change anything. Madeline gives this a thought, and when she opens her mouth to talk, she tells Claude that she is planning to leave the estate. This comes as a shock to Claude, and Madeline explains that she recently helped Hans out with something, and as a reward, he is sponsoring her to study medicine. Madeline thought it was too much for someone like her to handle, but with what is going on, Madeline has finally decided to take the offer. Madeline remembers how Lakia thanked her after saving his life, and this meant a lot to her. That single moment filled Madeline with pride, and it made her realize that she could do much better. Even if it sounds too much, Madeline still wants to give it a try. Since she is going to take the chance, she urges Claude to do the same. Madeline's words eat deep into Claude, and he realizes that Madeline has a point. Claude finally enrolls in the accounting class. However, he still has doubts about his existence in the class. He wonders if he is going to be a failure. Since the servant's salary just got increased not long ago, he wonders if he could have just stayed back and enjoyed the salary instead. When Claude submits his test paper to the instructor, Poitiers, the instructor commends him for a job well done. Claude tries to normalize what he did, but the instructor lets him know that what he did was special. The instructor tells Claude that everyone might be able to do basic arithmetic, but not everyone is good with bookkeeping. The instructor adds that even the smartest nobles have issues with this, but Claude perfected it. Poitiers admits that he was skeptical when he was appointed as an instructor, but Claude's performance has given him some encouragement. The instructor then says it with all confidence that Claude will become a great accountant. Claude is initially doubtful about this, but then he remembers the sacrifices Hans is making so that they can be better. Because of this, Claude decides that he will do everything in his power to become good. At the security training session, Hans is shocked to find the students serving punishments per Lakia's instructions. Lakia scolds the bunch, calling them useless. Apparently, 30 minutes earlier, the students arrived looking all arrogant. They spoke to Lakia the way they wanted until he taught them a lesson by beating the crap out of them. Now that he has shown them that he is more than capable of being an instructor, the students have no choice but to do what Lakia wants. Lakia is not impressed, and he tells Hans that the accounting division might be good, but the security division is filled with thugs and the like. Lakia believes that he is going to be wasting his time and energy if he tries to teach the lowlifes. Realizing that Lakia is not motivated to help, Hans drags him away to a private place where they can talk. Hans tells Lakia that he is aware of his qualifications and how he was able to teach the Emperor how to use the sword. Lakia replies that he was able to pull this off because the Emperor himself was ready to learn. Lakia then asks Hans if he is trying to compare the king to commoners, but Hans says no. Hans lets Lakia know that he is making the reference to tell him that he is such a great teacher. Hans adds that Callista has no knight order, and Oswald is the only knight left, but he is too old to be an instructor. Hans then makes a bold statement. He tells Lakia that the king is not different from the commoners. Hans says people are people, maybe they are noble or not. In the end, they are still people, and the only difference is that someone recognizes their potential and helps them grow. And with the situation at hand, Hans believes that Lakia is the best candidate for the job. This statement hits Lakia really deep. He realizes that Hans has more conviction than he even gave him credit for. Lakia then tells Hans that he is going to need more time and resources, but Hans assures him that he is willing to cooperate with whatever he needs. Lakia then notices that Hans is already getting comfortable with the way he speaks to him. Hans was not like this when they first met, but it seems he has dropped his nervousness. Hans lets Lakia know that he considers him a reliable person, which is why he is comfortable with him. Lakia is done receiving compliments from Hans, and he quickly walks back to the training ground. Lakia gets there, and he is surprised but at the same time impressed by what he sees. Most of the students are still in the same stance that he left them in when he went to discuss with Hans. Lakia then remembers what Hans told him about people being people until someone recognizes their potential. Lakia smiles as he remembers this, and he finally decides to give his all to training the lowlifes. He tells the students to get back on their feet. He then mentions that what the students need is not just muscles or bravado, but grit and persistence. He lets them know that their willingness to stay, even after being punished, is a good quality, and he urges them not to forget what they have learned. With this, Lakia swings his class into motion. Lakia had previously thought he would spend his next 5 years hiding in a boring situation, but he is glad he now has something to spend his time on. In that year, which is the year 853, the Callista Academy was established to support the founding of the Callista Bank. It was divided into 2 sections, accounting and security, and the students were exclusively commoners from the region. And then in the blink of an eye, 3 years passed since the academy started. 3 years later, Hans's mother is now much better, all thanks to the artifact. She steps outside of her room, which she hasn't done in a long time. Regina is worried about her, but she assures her worried daughter that she is fine. She has missed the scent of nature, which is why she stepped outside to take everything in. Feeling very happy, Owen tells Regina to walk with her. Over the past 3 years, things like Owen regaining her strength and all others have happened in the region. Elsewhere, tax collectors visit a woman's house demanding a huge amount of money for taxes. The woman is ultimately baffled as she has no way to pay such a huge amount of money. The conversation between the helpless woman and the tax collectors continues until her son steps out of the house. Surprisingly, her son is Claude, and he knows all about accounting and taxes. Claude has been studying for the past 3 years, and he now dresses formally, not like a servant. He boldly reminds corrupt tax collectors of the revised tax rate. The two try to argue their case, but they soon realize that Claude knows what he is talking about. All low-earning citizens have a special low tax rate, and since his mother falls into this category, Claude is able to use this to fight the tax collectors. The officials have no choice but to back off, and Claude warns them that he is going to file a formal complaint if he ever hears any bad report about them again. The two run off like chickens while acknowledging what Claude says. After their departure, Claude reveals his disappointment about the bad eggs they still have in the region. His mother is worried about him, but Claude assures the woman that he is fine. The old lady doesn't want Claude arguing with the officials, fearing that they might retaliate, but Claude assures his mother that Hans is there to take care of any problem they might face. Meanwhile, inside the castle, a new maid knocks on Hans's door with no reply. She continues this until one of the older maids shows up. The older maid then shows her junior the X sign on the door. She informs her that no one is allowed to disturb Hans once the X sign is up. The young maid is surprised to hear this, and she asks if Hans is doing something inside the room. But the older maid also has no idea what might be going on inside the room. The older maid adds that even Lakia is not allowed to enter the room once the sign is up. Unknown to them, whenever Hans puts the sign up, he has vanished to the lair to train. He levels up and he gets to talk to Seifert, whom he has not spoken to in 3 years. The dragon is impressed with Hans's progress so far. It turns out that Hans is now on the 6th circle, which is very impressive because even the Imperial Court mage only manages to reach the 5th circle. Siegfried notices that Hans has been able to properly merge with the dragon heart living inside of him, which means he is now capable of performing large-scale magic. The dragon pats Hans on the head for growing this much in the space of 3 years. Siegfried then asks Hans if he is training any disciples, but Hans doesn't understand what the dragon meant. Siegfried explains that all great mages always have disciples, and since it is his legacy to leave magic in the world, Siegfried would like it if Hans had disciples under him. However, he assures Hans that he is not forced to do so since the power has been passed down to him and he is free to do with it whatever he wants. Over the past 3 years, Hans has unlocked new areas in the lair, and these are areas filled with treasures and the like. Even though there are many treasures and Hans could have gotten rich selling them, he has no interest in this because this is not Siegfried's legacy. Hans then tells Siegfried about his plan to build a bank. Siegfried mistakes this for a loan shark, but Hans explains to him that it is totally different. Hans then assures Siegfried that once he is able to make the bank a success and he secures plenty of funds, he plans to establish a magic academy to carry on Siegfried's legacy. Hans comments on the fact that the current magic academies are just there for fashion and nothing significant. No one really tries to become a mage anymore since it is nearly impossible to get past the 1st or 2nd circle in someone's lifetime. Magic is no longer being taught as it is now considered a thing of the past. However, with Siegfried's power running through his body, Hans plans to revive magic. With this, he will be able to have dozens of disciples to pass down the magic to generations to come. Siegfried's pleased with Hans's plan, and he tells him to give it a shot. Hans then leaves the lair, flying in the air with magic. He is able to look down on the territory from above. He is happy that everything has been going on so well for the past 3 years. The preparations to open the bank are also progressing well. Just then, he remembers that Lakia told him about providing the knights with plate armor and longswords. Since the knights will be fighting people, they need protection too. Hans agrees with what Lakia said, but because Callista was an underdeveloped region with no threat, they haven't put too much importance on weapons and plate armor. However, things are much different now, and Hans knows that they need to prepare for war in advance. Hans then decides to scan the mountains, hoping to find iron ore that will be useful for the next stage in their plan. He is scanning the area when he suddenly spots a golden aura in the distance.
Hans has not seen anything like this before, and it catches his attention.
Hans moves in that direction to check out what it might be. He finds a wounded cat-like creature lying there helpless on the ground. Using his magic, Hans heals the creature. He carries the creature and admires it, and then decides to take it home. This turned out to be something really huge because the cat-like creature ended up changing into a person inside of Hans's room. After Hans carries the cat the night before, he notices that the cat is getting weaker, and he decides to take the creature to the lair where he can use the magic healing circle. He didn't bother to use the magic circle during Lakia's time, because he wanted to keep the location and existence of the lair a secret. However, he can do this for the feline creature and just set it on its way. He places the feline in the magic circle, and the feline gets healed. Hans expects the feline to stand up in 10 minutes, but to his surprise, the feline remains unconscious for the next 3 hours. Hans has no choice but to take the feline home with the intention of letting it out once it wakes up. He knows he has to do this very early in the morning because he and Lakia, who is now his guard knight, always have breakfast together. Hans places the kitten on the bed so it can sleep comfortably. The next morning, Hans wakes up screaming, and this catches Lakia's attention. He rushes down to Hans's room, demanding that he open the door. However, Hans blocks the door with his body while trying to digest what he is looking at. The feline he brought home the night before had turned into a full-grown man by the time he woke up, which is why he screamed like hell. Hans tries getting rid of Lakia by telling him that he saw a bug, which is why he screamed. He also tells Lakia that he will have breakfast with him later in the day. Hans then turns to the cat guy, asking him who he is. Hans still doesn't know that the cat was the one who transformed until the guy changes back into a cat. Hans had his suspicions, but now that he is looking at the cat guy transform, he realizes that the guy is a feline folk. Feline folks are a mysterious race living in a society that is cut off from the human world. The feline folks have existed as long as the elves and dwarves as well. However, people rarely see them because they are very cautious about exposing themselves. Since they rarely interact with humans, little is known about them. The cat guy starts walking around the room, and he suddenly decides that he is going to continue staying there. Hans is shocked to hear this because he doesn't remember giving the cat guy permission to stay in his room. Hans tries to debate this, but the cat guy reminds Hans that he was the one who took him in the first place. The guy claims that Hans kidnapped him and even treated his wounds without his permission. With all of this said, the cat guy informs Hans that he is now responsible for him. Hans realizes that the cat guy is very pushy and cunning. Hans then mentions the fact that the guy would have died if he had left his wounds unattended. Since feline folks have better abilities and physical strength superior to humans, Hans figures that there is no way the guy was hurt by a human. He then asks the cat guy if he was wounded by a fellow feline folk like himself. The question hits the cat guy really hard, and he stays mute, suggesting that Hans might actually be right. Hans is still trying to get closer to the cat guy when Lakia bursts through the door. This scares the two, but Lakia wastes no time drawing his sword the moment he spots the cat guy. He demands that the cat guy step away from Hans. Lakia quickly rushes over to where Hans is. He stands between Hans and the cat guy while pointing his sword at the feline folk. This is when Hans remembers that Lakia is a sword master, which means he can also sense the abnormal aura coming from the feline folk. The cat guy is pissed, and he raises his hand, ready to strike Lakia. Realizing that the two will hurt each other, Hans uses the blink spell and gets in between them. The two manage to hold back at the last minute so as not to hurt Hans. After successfully defusing the situation, Hans turns to Lakia, telling him to calm down. He tells Lakia that the cat guy is having some issues, which is why he has decided to take him in the meantime. He begs Lakia not to be hostile, and this act of selflessness shocks the cat guy. With a stern face, Lakia asks why a feline folk like himself is walking around in the human world. Hans then replies that it is a personal matter. Lakia angrily points at Hans, reminding him that he is his guard knight. Lakia scolds him for bringing a stranger into his bedroom without thinking twice. In addition to this, Hans jumped in front of his sword without the fear of getting hurt. Hans then replies that he was sure that neither of them would hurt him, which is why he did what he did. Hearing such words from Hans shocks the cat guy yet again. Lakia continues ranting about how dangerous feline folks are, and this is when the cat guy cuts in. He interrupts the conversation and reveals that his name is Asa. Hans is glad to hear the guy's name. He then suggests that Asa and Lakia put their differences aside and shake hands. He too did as told, and with this, Hans successfully found two companions in the Compton Mountains. Hans is not ready to ask Asa for details about his past, but he is sure that the guy will open up to him one day. Hans is not ready to push someone who just survived too hard, but he is worried about Asa and Lakia getting along. With this, the trio continues living their lives, but Asa is always on Lakia's neck. He might suddenly demand that the guy bring him snacks. Lakia doesn't like the fact that all the cat guy does is eat and sleep with no useful purpose. However, Hans still finds a way to spoil the guy, leaving Lakia really pissed. Not long after this, Hans tells the two that everything is now ready for him to open the Bank of Callista. With excitement, he reveals that the first Callista Bank will be opened in the capital. Looking into finances, if they are to mention the richest person in the kingdom, it won't be the emperor or even a duke. It turns out that the richest person in the land is Baronet Dominic Sullivan. Dominic was the one who started the empire's first banking business, and since then has dominated the financial world. After him, many nobles tried entering the banking sector, but they all failed. No one could fight off Dominic's monopoly on the banking system. In his home, Dominic receives his assistant, who is there to give him the report on things. While smoking a huge cigar, Dominic tells the guy to make his report in order of importance. Dominic is informed that he has been summoned by Duke McCarthy, and the summons is related to the Imperial Protocol. Knowing fully well that it is a royal summons, Dominic says that he has to go. He then tells his assistant to schedule the meeting for the afternoon. After this, he is informed that a particular noble, Count Chenoweth, has asked for another month to consider the proposed deal. Finally, Dominic is informed about the new opening of a bank in the capital. He is informed that the bank is being run by House Callista. but they only have one branch in the capital for now. When Dominic learns that the bank is being run by the Callistas, he doesn't put too much interest in it. He considers them a rural family with no notable investments to their name. Dominic assumes that the bank will go bankrupt soon enough, so he doesn't need to disturb himself. He tells his assistant to ignore the new bank, but in reality, Dominic plans to double-check if the Callistas have a backing that he is not aware of. Now in the capital, the new bank that just opened is attracting loads of attention. This doesn't usually happen, but the bank is gaining attention because of its business plan and strategy. It turns out that Han's new bank is only charging 1 copper to open accounts for new customers. In addition to this, they are giving out loans without collateral. At the regular banks, a minimum of 1 gold coin is required to open a bank account. And when it comes to giving out loans, they usually take collateral of equal value. This is the reason commoners have never had any reason to use banks, since only nobles can live up to the set criteria. But this is not the case with Callista Bank. New customers are given advice on how to go about their savings. The bank tellers ask for their monthly income and use this to set a savings plan for them. For the collection of loans, the bank only gives out loans after looking at the customer's income and credit rating. They plan to give out loans that the customers will have no issue paying back due to the level of their income. Even old people who can't read are not left behind. The bank attendants are willing to help every customer according to what they need. Callista Bank gives room for commoners who are poor and have no financial backing to get access to banking benefits too. The bank takes into consideration why their customers are opening the account and what they plan to do in the future. And with this, they are able to give solid advice. A woman enters the bank with doubts about getting a bank account, but she is ultimately shocked when the bank opens an account for her. Something surprising then happens after she is done opening the account. The woman is given a raffle ticket. These tickets will be handed out to everyone who opens an account with the bank in their first month. The woman is asked to put the raffle ticket in the designated box, and in a month's time, lots will be drawn to announce 3 winners. The woman is further surprised when she hears that the bank will be giving out prizes. Apparently, the first place person will receive 25 gold coins. The second place person will receive 10 gold coins, while the third place person will receive 5 gold coins. Everyone present in the bank is shocked to hear this, and they all start rushing to open an account just so they can get a raffle ticket. Standing in the lobby are Alman and Claude. Alman applauds Claude for his ingenuity. Apparently, the raffle thing was his idea. In addition to this, he brought the credit rating idea after brainstorming with other students like him. Moments later, the two receive a report that they have hit their goal of opening 100 accounts on the first day, and they still have 4 hours of work time left. Claude is absolutely blown away to hear this, and in addition to that, they have received 30 load applications. Alman is confident that Hans will be excited when he hears the news. Alman wishes that Hans could come over to see things for himself. The bankers and guards who were locally trained in Callista are all doing just fine. Alman says they have succeeded in creating a bank which everyone can use, and this is Hans's goal from the start. Not long after this, reports reach Hans in Callista. He is glad to find out that Alman and Claude are doing well in the capital. While having drinks with his sister and mother, he tells them that the bank has reached its target and everything is going well. Hans is impressed, and he plans to give all of his workers a hefty bonus. Regina is glad to hear this impressive news, but she still cannot believe that her brother has become a bank manager. Just then, Hans asks his sister if she is willing to try out a business too. Hans remembers that Regina once learned management. He asks her sister if she has ever thought of where to apply the things she has learned. Hans assures his sister that he is going to help her in whatever business she chooses to run. Regina then mentions that there is nothing coming to her head. She doesn't see herself as a talented person like Hans. In addition to this, she doesn't see herself doing anything in Callista. Hans then makes a suggestion. He wants them to go to the capital. Hans also tells Lakia and the cat girl this. Lakia is shocked when he hears this, but he is open to going to the capital. For the past 3 years, Lakia has been serving as Hans's guard knight, and he has done his job diligently. Since there are 2 years left for his name to be cleared, Hans is worried about Lakia stepping into the capital, but he is hoping that all goes well. Just then, he turns to the cat guy, and before he can call his name to ask him if he is interested in coming, the guy jumps at Hans in excitement. Lakia scolds the cat guy for always jumping at Hans. He tells him that Hans's body is frail and weak, and he could easily get hurt. However, the cat guy is so stubborn that he doesn't even have any regard for whatever Hans is saying. As they are planning to go to the capital, Hans sincerely hopes that things will turn out fine. When it is time to go to the capital, Regina is surprised that her brother will be taking another carriage. Hans explains that he can't leave Asa and Lakia alone with each other since they have not gotten along yet. He assures his sister that he will be following closely behind. It is going to take them at least a month to get to the capital, and Hans cannot afford to leave the two stubborn heads together. This then reminds Regina that her brother supposedly found the two while on tour. She wonders how her brother ends up finding strays while he is on his tour. She starts to doubt if Hans truly got the healing ring from an old lady. There is a moment of silence between the two since Hans doesn't know how to reply. Hans runs off, telling his sister to call him in case anything happens. Regina complains to their mother that Hans is hiding a lot from them, but Owen urges Regina not to think too much about things. She tells Regina that all they can do for the moment is watch and wait for him to open up to them when he is ready. With this, the family begins their journey to the capital. A month later, they arrive at the capital, and Asa is the most excited as he starts jumping in the carriage. Lakia urges him to sit still because the carriage is shaking, but Asa just cannot hide his excitement. Hans understands why Lakia might be uncomfortable. Everything might be new to Hans and Asa, but to Lakia, it is a return home and a reminder that he was betrayed. Asa continues acting childishly, and he even opens the carriage door while at it. This gets Lakia mad, and he knocks him on the head for being too stubborn. An argument ensues between the two, and Hans can only wonder when the two will finally get along with each other. He sees more reason why he cannot leave the two all alone, because it is inevitable that they are going to cause trouble. Not long after this, they arrive at the Callista townhouse and they are welcomed by Alman. The townhouse is an apartment that nobles usually keep in major cities outside of their territory in case they come visiting. House Callista never had a townhouse, which means this is their first. The house is not that luxurious, but it will serve them for now. In addition to this, Madeline is back from medical school and she will now serve as Owen's personal doctor. After taking a look around, Hans figures that he will be spending more time in the capital than Callista. However, he had already arranged a route just in case. Just moments after arriving, Hans prepares to go to the bank. Alman is surprised to see this, and he reminds Hans that he just arrived after a month on the road. Alman suggests that Hans rest, but he refuses. Hans says Regina and Owen are free to rest, but since the bank belongs to him, he needs to see things for himself. Asa immediately begs to follow when he notices that Hans will be going with Lakia. Hans tries to dissuade Asa from following them, but he is just too adamant. Hans arrives at the bank, and he is shocked when he sees a large crowd inside the bank. Alman informs him that this is so because they are conducting the lottery draw as promised. The third place winner of the draw turns out to be number 318, and she jumps in excitement when her name is called. Those who are watching are extremely shocked when they realize that the bank is actually keeping to its promise. Even the guards are having a hard time controlling the crowd since they are not used to having such a large number of people in the bank. Alman apologizes for the inconvenience, but Hans urges him to make sure that there are no safety incidents. However, Hans is impressed with what he is seeing. He never thought everything would go so smoothly. Since there are too many people, Lakia suggests that they leave, and Hans concurs. Hans has seen what he came to see, and he is satisfied. Hans then brings up a suggestion. He wants them to go shopping. They arrive at one of the shopping stores, and Asa excitedly reveals that it is different from the ones they have in Callista. Hans then tells Lakia and Asa to pick clothes of their choice. He assures them that he will be paying for whatever they buy as a celebration for arriving in the capital. Asa spots a nice fabric and quickly picks it out. He tells Hans that he wants the fabric because of its elaborate patterns. Hans asks him if he wants to cut it into a dress, but Asa says no. He wants the fabric like that. Asa reveals that they usually wrap fabrics around their body from their hometown. Asa tries it out, and it looks beautiful on him. Once Hans has settled Asa, he asks Lakia if there is anything he would like to buy, but Lakia says no. He claims that the knights have no need to dress up. Since Lakia has no interest in buying a dress, Hans suggests that he change his sword instead. However, Lakia still says he is not interested. Hans notices that Lakia is acting strangely, and he asks the guy if there is anything wrong with him. Lakia claims that he is fine, but deep down, Hans knows that he must be feeling the pressure of coming back to the capital. The trio talks past a knight commander, and it seems their conversation catches his attention. The commander turns back after hearing Lakia's voice. He suspects that the voice resembles that of Lakia de Rodriguez, but he has no way of proving it yet. Meanwhile, at the bank, something interesting is happening. The commoners who are present are shocked when they see a noble enter the bank. Inside the manager's office, the branch manager, Poitiers, is seen talking to a noble. Apparently, what the noble is asking for is way past Poitiers' pay grade. The noble wastes no time asking the branch manager to arrange a meeting with the bank owner himself. The noble finally introduces himself. He is the eldest son of the Count of Chenovis, and his name is Durand von Chenovis. He is at the bank because he needs a loan of 7,000 gold. Hearing this sends Hans and Poitiers into shock. 7,000 gold is a really huge amount of money. When converting it to modern money, it is 14 billion won, or 10 million US dollars. Poitiers wonders how Hans plans to handle such a huge amount of money. A few minutes earlier, Hans was just about to return to the townhouse when he was informed that he had an important client at the bank. He had to rush down, and now he is hearing that Durand needs 7,000 gold. Hans then asks Durand what he plans to use the money for. Durand is stunned by the question, and Hans lets him know that he is aware of his status as a noble. But the money he is requesting is huge, which is why he needs to have an idea of what the money will be used for before giving an answer. This is when it dawns on Duran that Callista Bank is capable of giving him the required funds. Realizing this, Duran comes clean. He explains that the Cenovis were once ranked among the 10 wealthiest families in the empire. This is all thanks to their possession of the empire's largest grain supply in the Chernik region. Chernik is a land blessed by the goddess of earth herself, making it a fertile region where even scattering seeds brings overflowing harvests. It produced the majority of the empire's grain supply, and because of this, the Chenovi remained wealthy for generations. This continued until the new count came in. The count is an addicted gambler, and before long, he exhausted Chernik's liquid assets. In a bid to recover his losses, he kept raising the stakes using the family treasures. However, things went really bad, and he ended up putting the estate itself up for collateral, and currently, the debt has grown to a huge sum of 7,000 gold in total. Talking about this large amount of money, the only financial institution capable of helping is the Sullivan Bank. However, the bank is demanding Chernik itself as collateral. Because Chernik is precious to the Chenovis, it is hard for them to put it up as collateral. Hans then thinks to himself that Chernik can actually pay Sullivan in a couple of years if they are able to manage their revenue. Hans gives it a thought after hearing everything Duran has to say. Hans tells Duran to stay put as he has to discuss with his staff. Hans then steps outside with Poitiers. Inside, Duran already concludes that there is no way Callista Bank is giving him the loan. While discussing with Hans, Poitiers reveals that Chernik is essentially lost if the Chenovis put it up for collateral. Hans doesn't get the logic behind this, and Poitiers explains to him. He lets him know that Sullivan Bank will do everything in its power to make sure that the Chenovis fail to repay the loan, and with this, he will be able to collect Chernik. This is why the Chenovis keep stalling the deal with Sullivan, hoping for a miracle. Their issue with Sullivan is already a public issue in the capital. However, Poitiers still believes that giving out a loan without collateral is wrong. Hans then starts racking his brain to try and find a way out. Hans has the capacity to give out the loan, all thanks to the treasures in the lair, but he wants to be careful with his spending. He doesn't want to throw money around out of pity or pride. He then tries to recall what happened with the Chernovis in his past life, but it is hard for him to pick something out. Since the Callista territory is in a remote area, they rarely receive information from the capital. However, Hans continues thinking, hoping that he will remember something that he can connect to his past life. Suddenly, something clicks inside his head, and his eyes light up in shock. Without even telling Poitiers, Hans runs into the room to talk to Duran. With the knowledge that Hans has from his past life, he knows something quite important, and he knows that giving out the loan is the best course of action. Hans tells Duran that Callista Bank will provide the requested loan, and this shocks both Duran and Poitiers. Poitiers tries to argue with Hans, but Hans tells him that it will be fine. He then asks Poitiers to step outside so he can personally handle the contract with Duran. Even though Poitiers is skeptical about the whole thing, he has no choice but to do as told. Duran sits there with total disbelief. He never thought he would get a lifeline because, since they ran into debt, the family has been mocked and trashed. They have been subjected to predators who want to get their hands on Chernik. But now, Callista Bank is coming to his aid with a loan with no collateral. With deep gratitude, Duran thanks Hans for the help. Hans then tells Duran that the money he is giving to him is not a donation or charity. Hans mentions that he is offering Duran a legitimate contract. Duran reminds Hans that the Chenovis no longer have any property to use as collateral, but Hans is not concerned about this. He places a paper sheet on the table and tells Duran that 2 written promises are all he needs from him. With this, Hans approves the loan to help Duran and his family. When Dominic Sullivan hears about this, he gets absolutely mad. He couldn't believe that a boy of 18 years was able to manage a bank to give out such a huge amount of money. With the information he has, the Callista territory has nothing of great importance, which means there should be no good revenue from there. However, Callista still managed to give out the loan. He then asks his assistant if there is anything or something that they are missing when it comes to the Callistas, but the assistant says no. With everything they have gathered, the territory is so underdeveloped that it has no artifacts or anything of value. All of these just keep driving Dominic crazy since he doesn't know how Callista is able to raise 7,000 gold. He tells his assistant that they need to carry out more investigation into the Callista family. Dominic cannot believe that all of his efforts to get Count Chernovis bankrupt are about to go underwater. Apparently, he is the mastermind behind the Count's gambling addiction, just so he can get his hands on Chernik. Not long after this, Hans receives a letter. He hasn't stayed long in the capital, but he is already receiving letters. This is all thanks to his sudden popularity because of the loan he gave to Duran and his family. It turns out that the Callista family has been invited to a banquet. The invitation was sent by Count Al von Heisbert, whom they have not even interacted with in the past. Lakia tells Hans that it is not a surprise because Hans is the most popular guy in the capital at the moment. Hans's bank was known to be a bank for commoners, but its ability to give Duran the loan of 7,000 gold made everyone curious. This is why Callista has become the focal point of countless rumors and speculation. To avoid suspicions, Hans had to lie to Regina and Owen that their late father managed finances well, which is how he was able to get the funds he needed for business. However, Hans knows that he needs to be cautious so he doesn't expose himself. Hans then asks Lakia and Asa if they are interested in coming to the party with him, but the two reject the offer. Lakia's rejection is not surprising, but Hans is shocked that Asa is not interested in going to a party. Asa is the fun type, and avoiding a party speaks volumes. Asa then reveals that he has no interest in social gatherings. Asa is considered a fun person because he likes to play with Hans. He lets Hans know that he only wants to play with him and no one else. Because of this, Asa has made the decision to stay at home, and even Lakia is shocked to see that Asa still has some level of restraint in him. At the banquet, lots of nobles are present. While some are drinking and having fun, some are talking about the next business idea. Just then, Hans, Regina, and Owen enter the room, immediately catching everyone's attention. Without introduction, most of the nobles in the house already figure that the trio is the Callista family. They were expecting someone who was older, but they were shocked to see that Hans is very young. They also find it hard to believe that Hans started a business at her age. Everyone has heard about the Chernovis affair, but they keep wondering how a noble from a rural area is able to pull off such a big stunt. Their attention soon shifts to the beautiful dresses that Owen and Regina are wearing. They are intrigued by how classic and original the dresses look. This sparks questions among the girls as they start wondering which shop made the dress. One of the girls wastes no time approaching Regina. Introductions get underway, and in no time, Regina starts getting the social life she deserves. Even Hans admits that he intentionally came to the banquet because of Regina. He is trying to introduce her to society since she has always been backstage. In his past life, Regina was the backbone of the family since her brother was useless. This prevented her from making friends or having a social life. However, Hans aims to change things up. He wants Regina to enjoy herself at this current time. It turns out that Hans also got the dresses from the dragon lair, which is why they turned out great on the girls. Hans is in deep thought when two nobles appear behind him. This startles Hans, forcing an apology from the two. They introduce themselves as Count Milligan and Viscount Roxon. The two reveal that they are big fans of Hans' works. They are impressed by Hans's ingenuity in opening accounts for people with just 1 copper. Hans is flattered by the praises, and he thanks the nobles for their kind words. The two ask about the 7,000 gold loan to the Chernovis, and Hans confirms what they want to hear, but lets them know that he can't share the contract details. Roxon tries to dig deeper in an attempt to know Hans's financial standing, but Hans assures him that there is no fear of bankruptcy for the bank. The two then start talking about their businesses and how hard it is to secure funds because of the recession. As expected, Hans offers them a way out by letting them know that they are free to come to the bank to get loans. They are in the middle of this conversation when Hans's mother shows up to tell him that she can't find Regina. She is already worried, but Hans assures her that Regina will be fine. Owen claims she left her with the other kids so that they could talk, but she suddenly disappeared. She has asked the other girls, but no one seems to know where she is. Hans then urges her mother not to worry, assuring her that he is going to find Regina. He tells his mother to rest while he searches for Regina. Hans assumes that Regina got lost because she is not used to banquets and parties. Using his magic, Hans searches the hall, but there are no traces of Regina. He expands the search outside but still doesn't get a glimpse of Regina. His search area finally reaches the garden, and he realizes that Regina is talking to someone. Hans steps outside to find Regina, but just as he gets closer to the garden, he hears Regina scream. Using a magic spell called Haste, Hans rushes to where Regina is. He arrives just in time to see a guy drawing his sword at Regina. Hans is shocked to see this. Apparently, weapons are banned at banquets, which is why Lakia didn't even bother to escort Hans to the party. Before the guy can hurt Regina, Hans teleports between them. Regina is shocked to see her brother appear out of nowhere. Using the rejection spell, Hans disarms the suspicious fellow. Just then, something interesting happens. A mage appears out of nowhere, and after a brief chant, he places a shield between Hans and the suspicious fellow. Even Hans is shocked to see a mage come out of nowhere, and the only thing he keeps wondering is who the guy is. Realizing that he is going up against a mage, Hans decides not to hold back, especially when his family is in danger. Not ready to back down, Hans launches a wind arrow attack at the mage. This pierces the mage's shield and flies past him and the sword guy behind him. The attack hits the wall, but the fact that the attack came through shocks the mage. Out of concern for the person he is trying to protect, the mage speaks out. He asks if His Majesty is okay. And this is when reality dawns on Regina and Hans, 30 minutes before the entire thing. Regina was having fun with the girls inside the house. Regina talks to them about how Callista is totally different from the capital. They are in the middle of this conversation when Regina looks through the window and sees a beautiful flower standing in the garden. Interested in the flower, she excuses herself from the gathering and walks to the garden. Her newfound friends are disappointed that Regina left them early since they haven't asked her where she got her beautiful dress. Getting to the garden, Regina stares at the beautiful pink flower, wondering what kind of flower it is. Just then, she hears a voice behind her telling her that the flowers are lilac. This startles Regina, and she immediately turns around to see the young man talking to him. The young man mentions his love for scents. He says this is why he spoke out without thinking twice. He then asks Regina if she also likes flowers. Regina is too stunned to talk because of the presence of a handsome man standing in her presence. When she finally opens her mouth to talk, she reveals that she doesn't know much about flowers, but she likes the fragrance. Because of how nice the scent is, Regina is thinking of planting the flowers along the street of the estate where she lives. The young man is surprised to hear this because most nobles do not plant lilac since it is expensive. The young man then takes Regina's thought further. He believes that the flowers will be nice if they are planted on the public street instead of being inside a walled garden. Without realizing it, the two start to synchronize in their thoughts. When the two finally realize that they are already talking in sync, Regina apologizes while blushing. Her face is already red from excitement. Even she doesn't know why she is so free with the young man she just met. Regina realizes that she hasn't even asked for the guy's name. She opens her mouth to talk, but at the same time the guy speaks up too. The situation gets even more awkward with the two lovebirds. Regina finally reveals that she wants to know the young man's name. Just as the young man is about to speak up, he spots a snake crawling out of the grass, and it is headed toward Regina. Regina also sees this, and she screams in fear. In reaction to this, the young man unsheathes his sword in an attempt to kill the snake. And this is when Hans showed up, believing that the young man was about to hurt his sister. By instantly teleporting between Regina and the young man, Hans stepped on the snake without even realizing it. It turns out that this is how everything unfolded, and the young man was not trying to hurt Regina. Regina and Hans bow their heads, asking for forgiveness. They didn't know they were standing in front of the emperor, but the young man didn't take offense at this. He understands that the situation was a misunderstanding. It turns out that the young man is the Emperor of Rosenbaum, late Crowell Carter III, and the reason he has a weapon with him is that only royals are allowed to carry a weapon to banquets. To make things even more interesting, the mage who protected him is the Imperial Archmage, Rumbly Ivan. He is the wielder of the continent's highest magic, which is level 5 magic. The soldiers stationed in the area hear the commotion and start rushing to the scene. Crowell has no interest in the soldiers seeing him or the situation escalating. Seeing how the Emperor reacted, Hans jumped into action without thinking twice. He immediately casts a mirage wall to deceive the incoming soldiers. The soldiers reach there and see nothing, causing them to go the other way, believing that they heard the noise from the other side. Once they are gone, Hans tells Crowell that he placed the barrier so that the Emperor won't have to get caught in further commotion. Hans is talking smoothly, but behind him, his sister is freaking out. This is understandable because she has no idea that her brother can use magic. As if this is not enough, Ivan grabs Hans. Ivan is totally blown away by the level of magic that Hans used. The Mirage spell is a level 6 magic, and Hans just used it without even uttering any incantation. Ivan cannot believe what he just saw, and he starts to wonder if he is wrong, but he is damn sure that he didn't mishear Hans. Crowell then taps Ivan on the shoulder to try and get the excited man under control. Crowell thanks Hans for his help and then demands to know his name and that of his sister. On the other hand, Ivan still cannot hide his excitement. Hans and Regina finally introduce themselves, and upon hearing their names, Crowell realizes that they are the current talk of the town. As for Crowell, Hans knows that he is a puppet to Townsend and McCarthy. This is why he doesn't have any strong allies, and the more reason he has not affiliated himself with any noble family. Because of these issues, Crowell barely makes public appearances. As expected, Crowell and Ivan say their goodbyes with Crowell, hoping that he will get to talk to the two much longer another time. Hans is surprised that even with all the issues Crowell is facing, he still showed up at a banquet. Hans then turns to his sister, suggesting that they go back to the banquet. However, Regina is not about to let what she just saw slide. She demands an explanation, and as usual, Hans tries to dodge the conversation. But Regina is not having it this time. Realizing that his sister will not let go, Hans promises to tell her later and urges them to head back inside first. Upon re-entering the hall, they notice that something is totally off from the way things were before. Regina rushes over to her mother to ask her what the problem is and why people are suddenly looking at them like they are trash. Owen replies that she is also confused but knows that everything changed when a certain gentleman entered the room. Talking about a certain gentleman, it turns out to be Dominic Sullivan. He entered the hall and tried to turn everyone against the Callistas, claiming the family lacks etiquette. Apparently, it is customary to greet all the guests in the house when a family is making its debut. Dominic trashes Hans and his family, saying they have no manners because they are from the countryside. Everything Dominic is saying is eating really deep into Hans, but Regina most especially. Regina wants to react to this, but Hans stops her. Hans understands what Dominic is trying to do, and he admits that it is a clever tactic. In truth, there was a really old custom to greet everyone at a banquet, but the said tradition has been extinct for decades, so no one follows it anymore. Hans is aware that everyone is already seeing them as rude and uncultured with the way things are. and the one leading everything is none other than Dominic. Dominic has a vast knowledge of etiquette, and in addition to this, he started the banking business. This gives Dominic the edge over everybody. It is no private knowledge that almost all the nobles owe Dominic's bank. This is why only a few will dare to defy whatever he says. Hans was already expecting Dominic to come after him because of the whole Chenovis issue, but he didn't expect Dominic to use a disgraceful tactic against him. Hans is totally confused, and he doesn't know what to do at the moment. He doesn't want to do anything that will escalate the situation. He knows he can endure the embarrassment, but his mother and Regina are out of the picture. Hans starts blaming himself for not thinking things through before inviting Regina and his mother to the party. He clenches his fist in anger, but out of nowhere, he hears someone call his name. It turns out to be Duran, and he is walking toward Hans with excitement all over his face. The moment people see Duran talking to Hans, the atmosphere starts to change. Duran tells Hans that he has been looking for him since he heard that he would be attending. Duran goes as far as introducing Hans to his friends. Hans is blown away by Duran's reception and that of his friends. In turn, this rubs off on everyone present in the room. The girls from before run over to Regina and start talking to her again. The girls want to finish their conversation from before, and Regina openly welcomes them. Duran and Hans then move to a private place so they can talk better. Duran apologizes if he spoke too familiarly with Hans, but reveals that he saw how difficult the situation is, which is why he stepped in. He reveals that Dominic has caused situations like this several times. Hans is in no way angry with what Duran did, but instead, he is grateful because the guy literally saved him and his family from embarrassment. Hans then reveals his surprise to see Duran command such presence from the other nobles. Duran reveals that his presence is highly influenced by his father's reputation. In the past, his father had good conduct, and he was always welcomed in every social circle. However, things are different now that he is only known as an addicted gambler. Duran also tells Hans that he is grateful for saving his family because without his help, he wouldn't be present at the banquet. Hans then realizes that he didn't help the Chenovis out of pity because he didn't even know Duran's father was well respected. On the way back home, Hans starts to reflect on the event of the day. He realizes that he messed up really badly. His encounter with the Emperor could have gone sideways all thanks to his recklessness. Hans realizes that magic and money won't help him shape the future. What he truly needs is information. Upon getting home, Hans partially reveals his identity to his mother and Regina. He confesses that he is a mage, and his power even surpasses that of the Archmage. However, Hans couldn't reveal more than this. Not that he doesn't trust his family yet, but because he is not powerful enough. In addition, he cannot let it be known that there is a dragon lair, as this alone would cause a conflict that he wouldn't be able to control. Hans's mother is not about this revelation. She has always known that Hans is hiding something, but she couldn't believe that Hans is a mage. On the other hand, Regina is still not satisfied since she was the one who witnessed it firsthand. Hans then reminds Regina to keep his magic a secret, and Regina agrees to this. Regina asks if Asa and Lakia know about his magic, and he says yes. This only gets Regina madder, because she can't believe that Hans told his friends about his magic, but not his family. Unknown to them, Asa and Lakia are standing outside, and they are hearing everything. Owen then tells Hans that he is free to hide things from them, but urges him to be careful because his safety matters most. Hans assures his mother that he will never make her worry, and he thanks the two for also believing in him. After the meeting with his family, Hans reveals that his intention in this world is not to be the strongest or to enact revenge, but to change the world for the better. Hans then heads to the barn while thinking of his next step. He enters the barn, closes the door behind him, and teleports to the lyre to train as usual. Asa and Lakia see him entering the barn, but the two can only wonder what Hans is doing there. Lakia doesn't want to push things because he knows that Hans is not ready to tell them all his secrets yet. Asa and Lakia end up arguing with each other again, and while this goes on, Regina is reflecting on the event of the day. Her face turns red from blushing as she finds it difficult to get Crowell out of her head. Elsewhere, we see two fellows, Jeprion and Annabel, in the Information Guild. Jeprion is playing with cards since there is nothing to do. Annabel screams at Jeprion to find something to do, but Jeprion reminds his boss that they are the Information Guild, which means people are supposed to come to them for information. However, their guild has been abandoned by all the nobles because of a particular rumor that spread some time ago. Jeprion believes that it is time for them to close down the guild and give up. Just then, they hear a knock on the door. Jeprion runs over to open the door. Hans and Lakia are standing at the door like clueless rats. Since Hans claims that he lost his bird, Jeprion asks him what color the bird is, and Hans simply replies that it is blue. Jeprion then leads Lakia and Hans into the building. As they climb the stairs, Hans thinks to himself that the only thing he now lacks is information. He didn't put too much importance on this before, but after the situation at the banquet, Hans realizes that he needs to equip himself with the right info. All his past life memories are limited to Callista or the major events that happened in the Empire, thus reaching Callista. Aside from this, Hans is clueless. This is his reason for visiting the information guild recommended to him by Lakia. They get upstairs where they meet the guildmaster, Annabelle. Hans is about to introduce himself when Annabelle cuts in. It turns out that Annabelle knows who Hans is already. He tells Hans everything about him and what he did recently, leaving a shock on Hans's face. However, this is normal for her to know since she runs an information guild. However, she has no idea who Lakia is. She then spots the cat behind Hans. It turns out that Asa is also with the two, but he came in his cat form. Annabelle carries Asa, petting him and rubbing his fur. Apparently, Asa insisted that he would follow Hans and Lakia to the information guild, but promised to remain in his cat form. Now that Annabelle is rubbing his body, he has no choice but to let it slide since he already promised to behave. Hans also knows a little about Annabelle. She is the guild master and a capable leader who built the guild at a young age. Hans is grateful that Annabelle hasn't turned her attention to Lakia and Asa, which is why she has no information on them. Annabelle's guild was once one of the top guilds, but they touched someone's collection and got hurt really badly. The guild nearly went into extinction, and the other nobles stopped using the guild out of fear of that someone. That someone is Lord Angus, and he is making sure to isolate Annabelle's guild. Annabelle is impressed that Hans knows something about her and the guild. She admits that she might have underestimated the guy a bit. Annabelle finally decides to get serious. She packs her hair and walks to the table to talk to Hans. She asks him what information he wants. Hans admits that he knows nothing about the capital and what is going on inside it because he has lived in Callista all his life. Because of this, Hans is offering Annabelle and her guild an exclusive contract. Talking about an exclusive contract, Hans wants Annabelle to gather information on the major nobles and merchants in the capital. He also wants reports on incidents and trends that are worth knowing. In return for these, Hans is willing to pay per information piece and also fully fund the operations of Annabelle's guild, called the Lucen Guild. Annabelle takes the contract and reads it to understand. Since the guild is in a tight spot with bad rep, she has no choice but to accept the contract. On a regular day, information guilds avoid backing a useless or rural family. But since the Lucen Guild is struggling, they have no choice but to accept. Annabelle then decides to show them what she is capable of. She offers to tell Hans about the 3 most important families in the Empire. Hans is surprised to hear this because he only knows of 2, and these are the McCarthy and Townsend families. Annabelle concurs to this, saying the 2 families are the most famous, which is why they easily control the Emperor himself. However, there is a 3rd important family, and they are the Krauser family. They are a 400-year-old noble house, but no one knows what they do or where. The current head of the family, Marquis Chai von Krauser, has been in seclusion for over a decade. Some believe that he is in his 20s, while others say 50s. The funny aspect of the entire thing is that the other 2 important families are trying to get the Krausers on their side. However, Marquis Chai Krauser has since declared neutrality. Even Hans didn't hear about the Krausers in his past life, and with the way Hans sees it, Lakia is also clueless. Hans figures that the family remains hidden because they might not be causing major incidents in the Empire, nor tied to the power struggle in the capital. Hans is glad with the information Annabelle gave him, and he urges her to carry out more investigation into the Krauser family. Hans then pays Annabelle for the information given, leaving a bright smile on the lady's face. She is so excited that she starts screaming about the money and the fact that she and Jeprian can finally buy meat. She is so lost in excitement until Jeprian calls her back to reality, urging her to remain composed. When Hans and Lakia leave the guild, Lakia asks Hans why he wants to know more about the Krauser family. Hans then reveals that since the 2 dukes are looking out for the family, he also wants to see for himself. Lakia agrees with Hans, but he is worried about the dangers attached to the request. When the trio returns home, Alman welcomes them with a worried face. He tells Hans that there is a visitor waiting for him, and this is someone they never expected. Hans enters the house to find the Archmage, Ivan, waiting for him. Hans starts to sweat, thinking that he must be in trouble. He remembers using verbal magic in front of the Archmage, and he is worried that his identity is about to be revealed. Just then, Ivan hits Hans with a very shocking and unexpected request. Ivan begs Hans to make him his disciple, and this leaves Hans's mouth wide open.